Okay, great. Thank you, Hannah. Welcome, everyone. So today we're diving into something that often gets overlooked, but is extremely valuable and makes a world of difference. That's documentation. So whether you're writing for, fellow developers or end users or for yourself, this talk is for you, and it helps you learn more about docs that turn complex code into very clear, easy to follow instructions. So what we'll talk about today is we'll get to know us and the Good Docs project. We'll also talk about why good docs matter and how to write good docs. So I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to my friend Elisa and let her introduce herself.
Thanks, Carrie. And I'll also quickly take this opportunity to just say thanks to Cass for inviting us to speak with you all. We're always interested in evangelizing good documentation, so we really appreciate Hannah for giving us this opportunity. I'm one of the co-chairs of the Good Docs project. I actually have another co-chair on the call today. Valeria is here with me, so it's good to have the co-chairs here. And I'm based in Utah in the US. I've been a technical writer for about 13 years, and I also, before that, taught academic and technical writing at Utah Valley University. When I'm not busy with my day job and the Good Docs project, I'm busy collecting vinyl records and going to see indie movies with my film club, the Citizens of Kane. On that note, I'll hand it over to you, Carrie, to introduce yourself.
Yeah, I'm Carrie. I'm a tech writer. I've been tech writing for 6+ years. I've been a member of the Good Docs Project for a long time. I'm a community manager and the co-lead with Lisa of the Outreach Working Group. I live just north of Seattle on Whidbey Island with my two Pomeranians, Pancake and Bourbon, and my husband. I'm a giant board game geek and video game nerd, and that's what I do when I'm not tech writing. All right, let's talk about the Good Docs Project. So we are a open source software project, which means a couple of things. We give our work away for free. We use the MIT no attribution license, which means anyone can use our templates for free. We appreciate when you give credit to us, but it's not necessary. We are all volunteers. No one does this as a job. No one's employed. We all just do this in our free time and because we're passionate about docs. Um, Also, our community is open to anyone who wants to give us their time and follow our guidelines. So, like a workplace, anyone can walk in and start contributing. But unlike a workplace, it's not led by one sole person. We're a community. We're very open and democratic. No one is fully in charge, unlike a CEO or a manager at work. We all make decisions together. Lots of us have experience, well over 15 years, but there's also newcomers who are very new to the field, and we all make these decisions together. I'm very happy to share that we have 100 community members and we're still growing, and we are a truly global community. Each of these pins represents an active community member, which is amazing. So we definitely have folks all over the globe who are passionate about docs. I want to share our mission statement. The Good Docs Project educates and empowers people to create high-quality documentation by providing them with templates, resources, and best practices to enhance documentation in the open source and beyond. So what does this mean? We have a lot of documentation projects at Good Docs, but our core project is templates. We're building a library of templates for a variety of content types and software documentation. A template is a structured outline that helps you create a specific content type more easily and consistently. What we do is we provide structure for you and user guides along with these templates. For example, an API template will consist of like key holders or placeholders for an endpoint URL or example responses and requests and parameters, everything that you typically see in an API reference template. What we'll do is we'll build everything from the ground up for you so you can more focus on your content and not the structure to help you get started pretty quickly. All right, so let's talk about why good docs matter. That's why we're here. I think everyone can relate to this, or most of us can relate to this, but have you ever been working on like an app or a tool and you find yourself, the first thing you do is you want to look for the documentation. And hopefully you find it and it's so easy to navigate and it's so helpful and you're able to find exactly what you're looking for without a little time spent. And you can go ahead and gear up on the tool and do exactly what you want to do. Or if not, you find yourself looking for documentation and you maybe find it's not so good, and you spent hours trying to navigate, trying to understand, and it's missing critical information and value, or there's no docs at all, which is worst case scenario, right? I think a lot of us has been there before. So the whole idea is for docs is to reduce technical debt and get you started fast. And so I'll explain more about why docs are important here, some core reasons. So kind of mentioned this before, but documentation improves the user experience. I like to say that docs guide the user to do exactly what they're intended to do or what they went there for. It makes everything easily to navigate and understand. Good docs usually include spreadsheets and real-world examples or graphs, anything that can really help onboard someone to complete their task that they are intended to do. Docs are also a trusted reference. Everything is in one repo or one place instead of like going through email chains or notes. Everything is right there and placed together, so you don't have to keep searching and searching and searching. I think that a big thing is that docs encourage collaboration and onboarding. It's very often that teams that work all over the globe like us, and so it can be really hard to create live training and everyone be available for that. And so if a newcomer comes on board, it's a lot of work for a trainer to be available for a trainee. This way with docs, everyone can work at their self-pace, and docs are available 24/7. And I also want to mention that documentation is a gift, so it really improves project sustainability. It's oftentimes that life happens and folks get really busy, and so if someone happens to leave a project or leave a task and come back to it way later, um, you want to make sure that your work is not didn't disappear. You know exactly where to pick up where you left off. And so instead of going through all kinds of code and redoing a lot of work, you can see in the documentation exactly where you left off and pick up and start working from there. This basically prevents you from having to reinvent the wheel and losing all your progress. Okay, and so now I kind of mentioned a little bit about why documentation matters, but I'll hand it over to Lisa talk about how to write good docs.
All right, thanks, Carrie. So you just heard from Carrie about why good documentation is so important. So now let's discuss what actually makes documentation good and how you can build it. We'll talk about the core principles of good documentation and provide you with some practical strategies for how to get there. So I need to do a brief detour before I start, and that's by talking about the elephant in the room, which is, can't AI just write all the docs for me? And I want to start by acknowledging that this is a fair question. Personally, I do use AI in my technical writing work. For example, one of the things I found AI really excels at is when I give it a template for the kind of content I want to write, and then I give it a high quality example of that template filled in, and then I give it the raw information I received from the developer that needs to be documented. And it can create a pretty good rough draft of the reference documentation for developers. So that's pretty cool. But at the same time, using LA, I don't know where that came from. AI has taught me about its limitations. Some of the big ones are hallucinations. They can make things up in subtle ways that look really plausible, and that makes it hard to detect if you're not carefully supervising it. They also fail to context switch. They have difficulty writing to a style guide and following best practices of the technical writing industry. And they can't develop deeper content strategies. We're a long ways from developing full reasoning AI models, and content strategy problems are just too complex for AI to solve at this point in time. So you still need humans. The bottom line is that when used responsibly, AI can be a helpful supplementary tool, but as of today, it can't replace a human writer because of these many limitations. So with that in mind, I do want to share a rule of thumb with you, which is to keep the human in the loop. If you haven't heard of this phrase yet, the idea is simple. Don't hand everything over to the AI and walk away. That's an important temptation that you should never give into. As the human, you need to stay actively engaged to review, correct, and steer the process. You could think of it as being like an autopilot on a plane. Yes, it can handle routine flying, but you would never get on a flight without a human pilot. Now apply that to documentation. AI can generate compelling initial drafts of documentation, but if you let it run unsupervised, it can veer off course. So the role of the human is to act like the pilot, to chart the course and keep the docs on track so that they are actually useful to other humans. But that raises an important question. How do you know what the right flight path looks like for documentation? Where are you even trying to go? In order to guide documentation effectively, you need to have a solid understanding of what makes documentation good. Without that, you're just supervising output without a clear vision for where you want to go. So that's why, in order to write good documentation or AI-assisted documentation, you first need to learn what your goal should be. So let's talk about that. So today we'll talk about 4 principles of good documentation. Good docs are user-focused. That means they're focused on user goals and the tasks that support those goals. Good docs are trustworthy. All of the information should be accurate, validated, and up to date. Good docs should be easy to understand. They should be well organized, concise, they need to get to the point, and they need to be written in plain language. And lastly, good docs are easy to find. They should follow predictable patterns so that users can intuitively find the information that they need. So let's talk about these 4 core principles in more detail with clear examples of what we're talking about. The first element of good documentation is that it is user-focused. Sometimes technical writers give this element a different name. They might call it writing task-focused documentation or jobs to be done documentation. I prefer calling it user-focused documentation because I like to remember who I am writing to, because that's how I see my value as a technical writer. I'm an advocate for the user. I have empathy for the user, and I bring that empathy to the documentation. But regardless of what you call it, the core principle here is that good content is centered on the users and the tasks that they want to do with the tool. That might sound really obvious and straightforward, but it is not. Even professional technical writers can lose this focus. And the reason why is because it's just so easy to produce documentation that simply describes the tool. It's fairly effortless to just name all the features and the buttons and the settings and what their definitions are. But describing the tool from the user's point of view, that takes deliberate focus and energy. So let me demonstrate what I mean by that. So what I'm showing on this slide are some examples of headings from some hypothetical documentation. The examples on the left come from tool-focused documentation, where the docs mostly describe the tool's functions and provide details about the tool. Notice how the headings are describing the names of the tool's features: table editor, centric utility, metrics tool, diagram pane, business rule. As a reader, I look at this and go, what? It's not relevant to me. I don't know why I should care. It's not intuitive. It makes me work. I'm going to have to read the whole section in order to figure out if it matters to what I'm trying to do. And I don't like that. By contrast, the headings in the second column are the same content, but written with a user focus, which means that it's focused on the users and the tasks they want to do with the tool. I want to edit a table, count records in a file, improve server performance, create diagrams, automate case management. Now I instantly know how the tool is going to help me do what I care about doing. So that hopefully gives you a sense of the contrast between tool-focused docs and user-focused docs. So that's great, but how do we get there? Well, it helps to take a step back and ask why it's so easy to make documentation that is tool-focused. One reason is because you needed that tool-focused mindset when you were building the tool. You needed to think about all the functional details about how the tool would work. And that mindset is valuable when you're building the tool. But when it's time to start writing the docs, you need a different mindset. So one technique to achieve that mindset is to use pre-planning tools to help you get out of the tool-focused mindset and into a user-focused or task-focused mindset. One of the things I'm really excited about for this release cycle of the Good Docs project is that we're actively developing some of these pre-planning tools right now. Right now, we're designing some templates that you can use as you're planning your documentation and getting ready to write. These templates will help you think more clearly about your audience and the tasks that they want to accomplish. But these tools, I don't know why I'm losing my voice all of a sudden. Sorry, again, get a drink of water. Sorry about that. But these tools won't be ready for a few more release cycles. So what do you do in the meantime? Well, this is a place where AI can help. First, start by thinking about who your audience is. So maybe your audience is an engineering student in their sophomore year of study. Maybe your audience is a climatology postdoc who is using your tool for climatology research. Then, after you've written your first draft, you can prompt an LA. I did that again. I don't know where that's coming from. You can prompt the LLM to imagine that they are your intended audience. Then paste in your docs and ask whether it makes sense. From that audience's point of view, are there any gaps in the docs? Are there any missing information? Are there any things that are confusing? Are there any unanswered questions? And I do find that it gives helpful responses. So that's a good possible application for AI. With that in mind, I'm going to move to the next element of high quality documentation, and that's that good docs are trustworthy. The core principle here is that you build confidence that your docs and your tool are trustworthy. And you do that when your docs are accurate, validated, and up to date. That means that your docs accurately describe the tool that they document. And it means that the docs and the tool are in sync with each other. When that's not true, users lose faith in the reliability of your docs and maybe also in your tool. So I don't know if there's any fans of classic rock out there, but I like to tell the story about the band Van Halen. Van Halen was an American rock band in the 70s and 80s, known for concerts that were epic spectacles. And Van Halen's contract for concert venues included a really bizarre clause that the concert venue needed to provide a bowl of M&Ms backstage. But the bowl could contain no brown M&Ms. If they walked backstage at the venue and they saw a bowl that had brown M&Ms, the band had the legal right to instantly cancel the concert at the venue's expense. This led some people to believe that Van Halen had over-the-top rock star egos, but that isn't true at all. It was actually a risk management technique because Van Halen's concerts had important technical requirements to ensure safety and performance quality. The no brown M&Ms clause was a compliance test for attention to detail. If the venue had missed that small detail, it suggested that they might have skipped out on something bigger, like weight limits or electrical safety. So sure enough, when brown M&Ms showed up backstage, Van Halen often found stage problems too. And that's true for documentation accuracy as well. When your docs have errors in it, or when they're out of date with your tool, or when they're out of sync with your tool in any way, it's like Van Halen seeing brown M&Ms. It makes you appear less reliable and trustworthy. Your users probably don't expect absolute perfection, but it will reduce their confidence in your docs and make them question whether they can trust you on the big things. So, how can you avoid that? Well, first off, don't write docs passively from memory without testing your assumptions to see if they're true. And passive writing like this often comes from treating docs as an afterthought. So one thing you can do is build documentation into your development workflow to ensure that it is up to date and in sync with your tool. I'm not going to have time to talk about this today, but this is called a docs as code approach. We can talk about that in the Q&A segment if you're interested, or maybe Cass could have us come back and we could do another presentation on docs as code in the future. But setting that aside, let's talk about other strategies. Probably one of the best things you can do is to test the documentation. As you're writing the docs, you should actually have the tool open and actually perform the steps you're documenting in the tool as you documented them. And if you can afford to, have somebody else who isn't you test the docs. That's called a usability test. See if the other person can follow along with the docs to find what they need to find and do what they need to do without your direct intervention. Because just keep in mind, that's the whole goal of documentation, is to empower your users to succeed with the tool without you being there to help them directly. So this usability test would test whether they can actually do that or not. One of my triumphs as a technical writing professor was when I would have developers in my class go out and perform usability tests on their docs by having other users try using their docs. Their minds were blown. It was revelatory to see how others exposed the bad assumptions they had made in their docs about effective communication. So if you can afford to, that's an awesome way to test your docs, and it's a fairly practical way to improve both your docs and your skills as a writer. So let's move on to the next element of high quality documentation. Good docs are easy to understand. The core principle here is that you need to focus on the meaning of what you're saying. Your goal is to reduce the cognitive load for the reader. It's possible some of you might have heard of the Reader's Bill of Rights by Daniel Pennock. It was meant originally for English teachers to have empathy for struggling readers, but I think we can maybe adapt it for documentation readers as well. So I'm going to posit that documentation readers have at least 3 fundamental rights. They have the right not to read what you've written. If it's boring or difficult or irrelevant, they don't have to read it. They have the right to scan or skim what you've written. They are in no way obligated to read what you've written in full. And they have the right to skip around until they find something relevant to them. Obviously, when you read documentation, you expect those rights for yourself. So you should expect readers to retain those rights as well. What this means is that you should write documentation from the perspective that if you don't make it easy to understand, your readers are going to balk, and they'll be perfectly justified in doing so. So in this case, the thing to actually avoid is to avoid everything you've been taught to do in academic writing, unfortunately. I say this as a former academic writing teacher, but in academic writing, you're rewarded for exploring ideas in depth and with nuance, for using complex or domain-specific vocabulary, for writing about abstract ideas, and for writing in the objective third person. That means never using words like I or we, which often results in very awkward writing that is difficult to understand. What you need to do instead is you need to do the opposite of in documentation writing. You need to keep it brief and to the point. You need to use plain language and concrete terms. And you should write your docs in the second person, meaning you use it with commands, saying like, do this and now do that, and using words like you to refer to the reader. So what are some practical strategies for doing that? Well, AI can help with this task. It's not a terrible strategy, but it's not perfect. When you tell AI to write documentation, it breaks a lot of these best practices. So again, it's important to keep the human in the loop. But I actually have another strategy for you to try, and that's Daniel Beck's strategy of writing like a caveman. So again, the credit for this idea goes to Daniel Beck, who is a technical writer and who at one point belonged to the Good Docs community. We miss him, but we wish him well. He says that when he starts stumbling on his words, he sometimes tries writing like a stereotypical caveman. You know, the stereotype of a primitive human with clipped sentences, poor subject-verb agreement, no articles, simple words. By writing like a caveman, you'll do a couple of things. You'll identify the essential facts, the core meaning of what you're trying to express. You'll separate those facts from the style in which they're presented, and you'll lower the difficulty level of revision by making a worse text to revise from. So let me illustrate this in action. Imagine you have some text like this. The interface provides the ability to instruct the operating system to render items between event dispatches. This sentence is wordy and abstract. It would take users maybe 2 or 3 passes to decode what it's trying to say. Well, how would a caveman express it? In caveman speak, think about how you would write down the facts in the shortest, most direct terms you can think of. Maybe it would look something like this. Interface tell operating system render, item render between event. This isn't good copy, but it at least expresses the core meaning. Now, try rewriting from the caveman version. Start from the caveman version, which expresses the essential meaning, but rewrite it so that it's expressing the idea in a more normal way. Maybe you would get something like this. The interface tells the operating system to render items between events. This third version is definitely better than the caveman speak, but notice that it's also an improvement over the original text. It's tighter, it's more concrete, it gets to the point. What's nice about the caveman writing method is that it forces you to focus on the core meaning of what you're trying to express. So it helps you change your approach to writing to make it more clear and easy to understand. You'll respect the doc reader's Bill of Rights by making sure you're giving them meaningful information that doesn't waste their time or force them to decode your meaning. So with that in mind, let's talk about the fourth and final element of good documentation. Good docs are easy to find. The core principle here is that being easy to find is that being easy to find is about the way the information is structured, and that should match the way that users intuitively search and expect to find information. So, how do they expect to find information? I think the theory of information foraging by Peter Paroli and Stuart Card is probably the best theory in this space. The theory is that, like foxes foraging for food, readers follow the scent of information. The scent of information comes in the form of cues and links, headings, hover text, labels, descriptions, and things that suggest whether continuing down that path will yield valuable information. Readers like to search, explore, and hunt for information that is nutritious enough, meaning it doesn't have to be perfect, it just has to be useful enough to satisfy the need. And it needs to be easy to catch, meaning it takes the least amount of time or energy or cognitive load to get that information. Readers move on when the scent grows weak or when the probability of a catch is low. Documentation readers like to balance the costs of obtaining the information against the value. Basically, that means if the information is useful, they stick with it until it's not useful anymore, and they'll abandon that path and try to find a new one. So hopefully that resonates with you. It should, in theory, match your own experience of looking for information. So with that in mind, how do we build docs that help make information foraging easier? As always, it helps to talk about what to avoid. And in this case, what we want to avoid is information fragmentation, which is usually caused when the organization of the content matches how the tool is structured rather than the user's goals, flows, and tasks. So let me explain what that means. In a past technical writing job I had for a startup software company, I had been there for just 1 week when one of our sales engineers scheduled a meeting with me to complain about our installation docs. He said to me, "They're so frustrating. All of the information is technically there, but I have to jump around to all these different places in the docs in order to find what I need. It's like I'm searching for buried treasure where I just have to hop from island to island and dig wherever I can. No one gave me the treasure map." That, my friends, is a person who is describing information fragmentation. That's when the content is there, but it's scattered in pieces throughout the docs with no obvious linkage or flow. In other words, it's hard to find. So, how do you fix it? Well, I was telling this story to someone at the Write the Docs conference earlier this year, and they said to me, "Well, yeah, but I don't actually want a treasure map. What I want is a subway map. I want a nice linear map path that guides me from point A to point B. I choose where I get on, I choose where I get off to go explore some more, but I should always have that subway map to help me find my way." I really like that concept. I have a hard time imagining how to fully build that vision because there's some tooling limitations to that model of information architecture, and it doesn't work for every type of documentation. But I do have at least one strategy to share with you to get you closer to this subway map ideal. And that's to align the organization of your content with how users think and move through tasks. So going back to the example of that sales engineer who complained to me about the installation guide, that story actually has a happy ending. We had a couple of meetings together where we mapped out the full end-to-end installation process in a flowchart. And then we reorganize the content to match that flowchart. And just from that one improvement alone, the satisfaction scores for the documentation improved by 32%. So I think that's a good practical approach to consider. Think about the high level flow from the user's perspective and then design the organization to match that flow. There's definitely more I could say on this topic, but we'll just leave it at that for now. So we've talked about 4 principles of good documentation, and I hope that you found this discussion empowering and energizing rather than overwhelming. But if you found it overwhelming, I want to remind you of one very important thing, and that is that even bad docs are better than no docs. Don't let the perfect become the enemy of the good. I have yet to read or to write perfect documentation because, frankly, I don't think there is such a thing. But I've had plenty of good enough documentation, and I've read plenty of bad documentation that still helps me at the end of the day. I'm grateful for that bad documentation, and I'm glad that I had it instead of nothing. And your readers will be grateful too. So at least write something, because then you have something to work with and for readers to respond to. And you can always iterate on that and make it better over time. And one day, those docs will become good docs. All right. With that in mind, that's the basic core of our presentation today. But before we move into Q&A, we have a favor to ask of you. Again, if you felt energized and empowered by our presentation and what we're trying to do at the Good Docs, feel free to help us out. I'm going to drop some links into the chat right now. Give me 1 second to do that. Hopefully they will be formatted correctly. That looks good enough. Okay, just dropped in some links into the chat. If you want to help us out beyond today and you only have 30 seconds, you can follow us on LinkedIn. I included the LinkedIn link there. If you have 5 minutes, you can try looking at our templates. Each of our templates has a link to a feedback form at the bottom. So if you're using our templates and you want to give us a shout out and say, hey, this was awesome. We never get that kind of feedback, so it'd be good to know if you liked it. But if it also wasn't helpful to you in some way, then you can help us improve it, so you can use that feedback form to tell us what could be tweaked about the template to make it more useful to you. I have Valeria here, who's the chair of she's a co-chair with me, and she leads our user research project. So I have to give a shout out to Valeria, which is that if you have 45 to 60 minutes, you can help us with our user research. We really desperately need more developers to participate in our user research project about templates. And since this is a developer audience, we would love to talk to you. So if you're interested in that, you can use this form to sign up to do a user research session with Valeria and some of the other members of our working group. And if you're feeling super, super generous with your time, you can join our project. We could always use more developers in our project. That's a really valuable perspective that we value in our project. So with that in mind, we can move into Q&A. Okay, I will stop sharing unless I need to share again. And yeah.
Thank you, Elisa. Thank you, Carrie. If anyone has questions, feel free to put them into the chat, or you can raise your hand. If you think you're going to be first, you could probably just unmute and ask. While we wait for those to come in, something that I was wondering about is you mentioned essentially doing usability tests to get a feel for how the docs are going. I'm going to ask a classic question. How many people do you talk to get that kind of feedback?
Obviously, there is the law of diminishing returns, where if you at some point you start to not need that much feedback anymore. One is gigantic, so even just doing one would be hugely valuable as a usability test, especially if that one person was your target audience, but and anytime you add more to that, I would say up to at least depending on how diverse the testers are, 5 is a good ballpark. If you want to go be gold standard, 5 would be good. But even one, just one,
Hmm.
will be tremendously valuable to you. And one is pretty low cost to achieve. You just have to ask somebody to, will you please test our docs? Will you pull up the tool and have the docs open and see if you can accomplish this task that we need you to accomplish and see what
Yeah.
happens, you know? Yeah.
We've got a couple questions in the chat. Mike Haru asks if you have advice for keeping documentation fresh.
Yeah, okay. So I will invite Valeria to also chime in when we're doing answers. Valeria is one of my fellow co-chairs, and also Carrie, feel free to chime in if you have advice on this. But I do think the best way is to build docs into your development process. Again, I didn't have time to talk about docs as code. We could talk about that now. If you want us to talk about docs as code, let us know if that's of interest to you. But docs as code is basically the process of building your documentation into the process of developing your tool. So you use the, you know, in fact, I even have a slide on it, just in case. I was just not sure. Let me go ahead and share my slide on it. You know, let's see here. So it's the idea that you should write documentation using the same tools and processes that you use to develop code. So it should be in the same repository or like a sibling repository as the code. It could use the same tools that you use to develop the code. You should use those same tools for documentation. So we're talking about things like CI/CD pipelines, linters, you know, everything that helps you kind of. I hope I'm not using insider logo, that you as developers know what I say when I say shift left with your code. You should shift left with your documentation as well. If you need me to unpack that phrase, I can. But using the same workflows, like the same kind of standards as the code. So building it into certain steps of the process. I think a good way to think about docs is to think about it the same as testing. At the same time that testing occurs is about the same time that docs should occur. So if you're building it into your workflow, then it makes it easier to keep your docs up to date because you're doing it roughly at the same time you're doing the development. I'm gonna toss it over to Carrie or Valeria. Yes, thank you, Valeria, to add to that. Yeah.
Yeah. Also another tool that you could use, and I'm going to share some links with you in the chat, is the tool that Manny Silva, another technical writer, he developed Docs Detective. It's an open source project, and you can use it to test the steps in your procedures, for example. And he also has launched a book called Dox's Test. I will also share the link for his blog. So those are two ways that you can keep your docs updated.
Yeah, I think I will add to that. Thank you, Valeria, and to say that uh it's really, it might be some work up front so that you can keep your docs fresh, but I would really highly suggest putting effort and time into making a style guide. I know it seems like a lot of work, but I think that that way it's a document you can share with others who want to contribute, and you can use all the same language and same tone and have your docs sounding like one cohesive unit. And so that will really help a lot. And then schedule as many reviews as you can so everyone feels a sense of ownership for the docs before and after. If you do feature launches, that helps. And then using something like version control, like Git, is really useful for you know, larger teams, I think. But yeah, kind of going back to what Lisa said about docs as code, I think that's important.
We have another question in the chat about getting involved with the Good Docs project for review and improvement of existing docs. Kelly's noting that they work at an HPC center, involved with user docs, and could really use some help. I'm pretty sure Kelly has a very relatable experience. So how can people engage?
Well, I hope this isn't like letting the cat out of the bag, but just letting you know that we are having some conversations between the Good Docs Project and Cass about how we could possibly explore those kinds of opportunities. It's still a little, we're still very early in those talks, you know, but we would love to kind of explore, because what's kind of nice is we have a community of writers who want to build experience and want to help out, and want to want to be the force for change in the world, the change that we want to see. Like, we want to help make good documentation in the world. And then we've got like a bunch of people in your community who need that, who could use our help, who could use our assistance. Feels like there's some matchmaking that could be done here. I don't know what that will look like. We're still very early in the conversations. But if that sounds cool to you, like, maybe let your CAS organizers know that sounds cool to us. And we'll see what we can do within the limits of what our bandwidth is, I guess. So, yeah. Valeria, is there anything you want to add to that? Valeria is the chair, she runs our partnership program. So,
Well, no, so just that we welcome people from different fields of the technical industry, and yeah, we, like Alisa already mentioned before, we would like more developers to join our community and help us improve our templates, and I think that's it for me. Thanks.
yeah.
Eric asks about how you'd recommend making a large amount of documentation for one project more presentable and easier to navigate, especially in old and growing projects. He liked the story about the install docs and strategizing a new layout. And perhaps relatedly, there's also a question about just what platforms maybe approximate the subway map approach.
Yeah. Yeah, that's always an interesting challenge when you've got like a lot of documentation, but it could be improved, you know. So then it's less about creating new documentation from scratch for a new tool, and more about improving existing documentation for an old tool, or a more mature tool. That's what I should call it, a more mature tool, right? So mature projects like that require different strategies, but again, I kind of feel like some of the tools that we'll be developing in the Good Docs project will help for that. With that, where I think the first place to start is to understand who needs to use your stuff. Like, so if you identify, we have these core audiences, like we have, users who need to do this with the tool. Like, so you kind of identify what they need to do with the tool at the core, and what their expertise level is and why they're coming to your tool and to your documentation. So just kind of getting a clear, like, writing out, like, who is my audience and what do they care about, just so that you all have a shared idea of who you're writing to, and who's using the tool. So once you have that, then the next piece is to then identify what are the core tasks that they need to do, and like, so you could kind of like just kind of map out, okay, they need to first install the tool, or set up the environment where they can use the tool or something like that. And I recommend starting with that getting started experience and making sure that that is clean and clear, where you go with my sales engineer and you kind of map out the flow, like at a high level. First they need to do this, then they need to do this, then they need to do that. You need to test it yourself to make sure that's actually true, and then you write the documentation to match that. So I recommend starting with the getting started experience, because if that doesn't work, then no other experience matters. And then identifying the next core task. What's the next core task that they need to do with the tool? They need to, capture sample data and import it into the tool. I'm making something up, right? That's the next thing they need to do. How do they actually do that? So you do the same process again. Like, what's the flow of what they need to do in its most concrete caveman speak sort of terms? They need to do this, then this. And then, you write the documentation to match that flow, make sure the headings match, make sure, yeah. So that's kind of my approach is like, you just kind of take one task at a time and say, first they need to do this, then they need to do this. And just kind of map that out. That's my personal approach, is to kind of step back, think about the user and what they're trying to do, and then write to that vision, I guess. Let me mention or toss it over to Carrie and Valeria. Anything? Tell me about your tips and strategies. What do you do in that kind of, when you've got a mature project where you're improving the existing docs and stuff like that?
I think it's important to what you said, is organize your topics by task, because it's really unclear like where a user will find your docs or how they will search. So usually that they will search by task, and so and often, especially like large doc sets, they aren't read like a book from page one to the end, the very end, the final page. So they're always going to drop down in the center of the doc. So I think that if you have a large doc set, hyperlinking is important, and then also like it might sound like it's duplicate content, but I think it's good to give a little bit of context where they land, wherever they land. I think that's important. Yeah, what do you think of Valeria?
Yeah, definitely plus one to what you both have said. Um, Maybe I would just add that besides the tasks, also think about what concepts users need to know in advance to complete those tasks. And the last thing that I want to share about this is the Google ran a program from 2019 to last year, and in fact, I participated last year in the last um, uh, Google. It was called a Google Season of Dogs, where they gave financial help to open source projects to hire some technical writers for a season, 6 months or so, to help these projects improve their documentation. And what they learned from all these years, because at the end, these projects wrote a report, um, and they took all these lessons and they created two resources called the Docs Advisor and the Docs Archetypes. And I will share the links here in the chat for you. And basically, these resources, what they do is that they help projects to try to tackle how to improve existing documentation, and they describe several approaches, and they give a lot of tips on how to do it.
I saw a question about from Mary. This is my first time hearing about Good Docs Project. Excited about the templates. Yay, that's great. And she was curious about, have we heard about Divio's documentation system? Yes, we most definitely have. That's more commonly called diataxis. Like that's another, like they were developed by Daniela Prosciutta at Divio, but he doesn't work for Divio anymore, and so he kind of took them out of Divio, and they're now called diataxis, is that approach. Have we heard of that? Oh boy, have we heard of that. I want you to know that, so Valeria and I are one of three co-chairs. Valeria is over EMEA, I'm over the Americas, and Michael Park is over the APAC region. He's based in Australia. He works with Daniela Prosciutta, so he's very, very passionate about diataxis. For those of you who don't know the diataxis approach, I think Mary linked to it, which it's the Divio approach, but if you search for diataxis, it works too. He basically puts documentation into four core types. You've got explanation, reference, tutorial, and how to, I think is how he conceives of documentation. I really like the diataxis approach. I especially like it for developers. I have so many developers who come up to me and say, oh my goodness, have you heard of diataxis? It's so great. It helped me finally understand how documentation works. So yeah, I totally recommend checking out Diataxis. It's really helpful when you're getting started with documentation for understanding different types of documentation. We're missing like one template, but we plan to put out a Diataxis template pack to help you use Diataxis. And Michael Park, I'm sure, will provide lots of really helpful resources for that template pack because he teaches courses on it and stuff like that. Okay, yeah.
Another question in the chat was about which writing platforms can help provide that subway map feature. I know you were saying that it's a little bit limited, but what would you recommend?
Yeah. Okay, so that's docs have like two sides, you know. I see them as like two arms, and you got to keep them both in shape to have good documentation. One is the content arm, and the other is the tooling arm. This is a tooling question. And we are getting better at tooling at the Good Docs project. We do have a working group that is focused on tooling, like answering tooling questions and providing recommendations about tooling things. I think the better decision to make when like I can't think of like a piece of tooling that provides that experience, but per se. But I think you can do it with just about any platform. It's more about it's a little bit more about the content than the platform. But to kind of give you a sense of like what something that excites me, let me see if I can find an approach that kind of shows you a little bit. I'm sorry, I am using a left-handed mouse and I'm really slow with my left-handed mouse because I am right-handed, but I'm doing it for carpal tunnel stuff. So let me find an example just to kind of show you what this would look like in practice, at least one that I think is intriguing from this point of view. Give me 1 second. Since I wasn't prepared for this, it just takes a second to find it. Okay. Python users, do we have Python people out there? This is a Python example. Let me share. Like, I really love Real Python and their approach to it, where, you know, like this kind of follows the subway map idea, in my opinion. Where you've got this is both documentation and like videos and instructional materials, but notice that you've got kind of like a clear, oh, that's more like I like their start here. No, let me do, so they have learning paths. Take a learning path where you, like if you click on their intro to Python course, notice like also the images make it so approachable. It feels like, oh, I can learn Python. This is something I can do. And notice that it has like kind of modules that kind of guide you through the process. And sort of tell you where you need to go, and that you could at any time go back to this page. This is like your subway map, and be like, well, I want to learn more about numbers and math. I want to go deeper into that. It's that kind of idea. So you could kind of have a learning path that guides you from point A to point B. That's one possibility. It's one way of organizing things. I'm just throwing this out there as an idea that I find intriguing, but I still feel like there's more work to be done in this space. So there you are, Carrie, any ideas from you on how to get that subway map? Platform recommendations?
No platform comes to mind, but I think that maybe a way you can do that in your documentation is by adding, for example, at the end of each article, a next step section where you can link to other documents that are relevant for the topic, so that the reader can explore more. And they don't have to be sequential. They can just be other points of other things that are relevant to the topic. Cross-referencing within the text, it's also a way to provide those like subway maps, let's say.
Yeah, I think you're right, Valeria. I think that like a subway map allows you to have your way from point A to point B, and those could be like parent topics, and then but you can see all the child topics that are available to you, and you kind of get an understanding of the bigger system at large without having to go without having to scroll a lot through information. You can just click on each one instead of and jump around a lot without feeling like you have to read all the way through from point A to F. You can jump around and get off on each stop and still understand where you are at large of the whole system. Yeah.
Thank you all so much. Our hour is up. This has been really great. I appreciate you coming to talk to the group. Thanks everyone for your questions. Like I mentioned, we do not have our November meeting, but I hope to see you all in January. And if you have a speaker you'd like to hear from or a topic you'd like to cover, yeah, just shoot me a message. Thank you, Elisa, Carrie, Valeria. Thank you.
Yeah,
Thanks,
thanks,
everyone.
thanks everyone.
Thank you.